We're wasting our company's time, our teammates, and most importantly, our customers' time. So I want to talk about different ways and better ways of defining products to reduce the waste from the product development process. We're going to go through a series of examples. I'm going to start off with 2 examples of companies that essentially made a lot of mistakes along the way and have publicly written about them. And we'll go through some of those ideas and what they talked about. And then we'll talk about this idea of design thinking, which IDEO pioneered, and Lean UX, and how we can use the foundations behind those ideas to build better products. And I'll show you that through case study after case study after case study. I've got a bunch of them. So let's go through that. The first company I want to talk about is PlanCast. How many have heard of PlanCast? Very few. Do you know why? Because they're dead. PlanCast was a social, it is actually still around. I think they sold it to a big organization, but it's a social event sharing site. So essentially you're saying, here's where I'll be, come join me if you want to, but this is my social outlet. I'm going to this meetup, I'm going to this conference, I'm going to this party, etc. And it launched to a bunch of fanfare. It was a very public launch. They launched on TechCrunch. The founders were Silicon Valley entrepreneurs. Everybody knew them. There was a lot of hype and a lot of traction. And it was a very exciting time for PlanCast when they first launched. And they ended up selling the company. And in January of 2012, the founder of the company, Mark Hendrickson, published a post-mortem on TechCrunch, which was appropriate because that's where they launched. They launched the company on TechCrunch, and so they published a post-mortem on TechCrunch. And I've pulled a couple of quotes from that post-mortem, which I found interesting. And I've actually talked to Mark to get the background behind some of these ideas, and so I can fill in some of the gaps around some of these quotes. So here's the first one. While the initial launch attraction proved extremely exciting, it misled us into believing there was a larger market ready to adopt our product. So when they launched, their acquisition and their traffic charts were hockey sticks, huge hockey sticks, right? And that's because the feedback and the traction that they got came from the tech ecosystem, from that Silicon Valley bubble that they were living in. All their entrepreneur friends, all their VC friends, and everybody in the Valley was signing on to this. And it sounded like they had a huge hit on their hands. Lots of early adopters, lots of VCs on there, other entrepreneurs. But there was no check from the founders to see if anybody outside of Silicon Valley was actually using this product. To them, it was a huge hit. So much so that they were touting their numbers. We have 100,000 registered, and 230,000 people visit the site each month. This is what the Lean Startup crowd calls vanity metrics. Right? They make you feel good about yourself, but they don't tell you whether or not your product is actually getting traction with your users. They didn't measure retention. They didn't measure activation of users. Active users come back to the site and use it again and again and again, not just visit it once a month, and then they never come back. And it gave them a false sense of success, and worse, it gave them a false sense of product market fit. In other words, they built a product for a market that had this need, that they were solving an actual problem. I love this one. This is the purpose of their product, was to share plans. I love your site, but I have no use for it, is what this quote said. Okay? The problem statement that this team set out to solve was that the average individual doesn't have enough insight into all the social opportunities going on in their circles. And they didn't want people to miss out. But this was a personal intuition. This was an assumption made by the founders. There was no proof that there was a wide market need for this service. And there was no upfront research done to validate these hypotheses. And they spent 5 months building a product, spending VC money, spending their time building this product. And when I talked to Mark, and I asked him, I said, why did you find this out before you spent 5 months building this? And the feedback I got from him was that this was a social website, and that social was a different animal, and that you couldn't do any upfront research to test the viability of a social website, which I completely disagree with. And we'll talk about that in a second. One more. Most social networks feed primarily on vanity. Sharing plans, unfortunately, doesn't present the same opportunity to show off and incur those same happy feelings. Again, after launching, they learned that people don't view the things they do on a daily basis as a point of pride. I'm just going to this meetup. I'm just hanging out with some friends. Right? It's not a point of pride. And over time, they saw no social sharing of these plans. Why was that happening? What was driving the lack of social sharing? Again, they had to find this out after they'd spent 5 months building this product. Was there an opportunity to learn all of this before they launched the product? This is my favorite one. They had to make a decision about which features to launch and which features not to launch. And so they didn't want to become another Evite. So they explicitly decided not to include an invitation feature as part of this. You're going to tell your friends where you're going to be, but you can't tell them how to actually get there or get invited. You can see a map, obviously, but you couldn't get invited. Right? The lack of an invitation feature, it caused a situation where many people felt awkwardly aware of events that they weren't invited to. Right? This is not a positive experience out of a social website. Right? Now, interestingly, again, they weren't sure which features to build. And so they took a philosophical stance and spent 5 months building that stance instead of validating whether or not this was a good idea, right? And it was subjective conversation, not any kind of metrics, that made them go move forward with this feature and then maintain it throughout the life of the product. Now, interestingly, another company died recently. This happens a lot in the tech world. FormSpring also recently shut their doors. Are you guys familiar with the site? Yeah, kind of ask me anything. You can put your sign up for an account, and anybody can ask you any question, and you can answer it. Essentially, that's the site itself. And they also about 3 years later shut down. Lots of traction, and their charts again. If you read the post-mortem that was posted by their designer, again the charts for their adoption were through the roof. Right? Not even hockey sticks, like vertical lines, straight up right to infinity. Into their growth. And again, what's interesting is out of these post-mortems was this. I love this quote. The first big project we worked on was a FormSpring button, right? That you could embed at the end of blog posts. We had millions of users, so we figured it wasn't a stretch to imagine they browsed other websites and would gladly click a FormSpring button at the end of a post. Tweet this, Facebook share, right? We spent months on the system making sure that they could handle the traffic when they launched this button. They had to design it. They had to work with publishers to implement it and make sure that it was easy and scalable. It's a huge bet on their part. And it was someone else's idea, and it flopped as part of the product strategy. Again, this is waste. Right? The approach that was taken here was wasteful. So let's talk about ways to get that waste out of the product design and development process so that we can build products more efficiently. The key questions that these companies were trying to answer for themselves, right, is how long do we wait before we launch? Right? Tom started touching on this in the first presentation. How do we define the right requirements for our product? How do we know which features to launch with? Which features are more important than others? Which ones we should spend more time on? And finally, what signals are we looking for from the market to indicate that this is successful, that we have product market fit, that we have traction, that we're retaining users, and that we're activating users? And so if you want to find out the answers to this, you need to rethink the word requirements. Requirements seem so finite and, well, required, right? It's in the word, and you have to build it. And so I propose that requirements are actually assumptions. Okay, they may be well-researched, they may be educated guesses, but they are assumptions that we're making about our target audience, their needs, our product, our design, the performance, our user experience. And if we can articulate them as assumptions, we start to rethink how we approach building them, because all of a sudden they're not required, right? How many of us work with this product manager, right? Or CEO, right? Right? Essentially, this is when you get handed a requirements document. To some extent, this is what happened. This is what's happening. Right? There is a level of rigor. There's a level. I'm not disparaging product managers. Don't. It's not the point of this. My point is that there's a level of rigor and study and analytics and insight that drives requirements. But at a certain point, someone has to make a subjective decision as to what will solve that. So how can we quickly find out whether that's the right idea or the wrong idea? Many organizations work this way. And when you change from requirements to assumptions, it's a philosophical shift. It's a change in the way that your company operates, your teams operate, and your culture. Because you have to start bringing this experimentation mindset to your team and your project. And with experimentation comes failure. Short failure, quick failures, but the ability to push the boundaries and find out whether this is the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. You have to fail to learn. And if your organization doesn't embrace failure, how can you get it to do so? So if requirements are actually assumptions, then what we know becomes what we believe, right? We don't know until we've actually seen customers use it, right? Don't fight those desire paths. Let's see what happens when they actually use it. Right? What we know becomes what we believe. And so then, let's build it becomes let's test it. So before we spend millions of dollars and hours of our time making sure the infrastructure can handle a button that no one's ever going to click, let's see if they'll click the button first. So how do you do this? Well, first and foremost, design thinking can help. And I'm glad that Tom from IDEO was up here, because IDEO pioneered design thinking. And this is the definition as defined by Tom Brown. It's a style of thinking. It's generally considered the ability to combine empathy for the context of a problem, creativity in the generation of insights and solutions, and rationality to analyze it. Now notice there's no mention of any discipline in here. This doesn't talk about creative people doing this, or designers, or UX. We're talking about building empathy by observing our target audience, seeing what they do. Being creative in solutions. Creative is not a discipline. Anybody can be creative. And then rationally analyzing what we've seen and making product design decisions based on that. And so then there's this idea of lean UX as well, that Yoda tells Luke about in the swamp. And then Luke shared with me. So this is the definition of lean UX, and I actually wrote this. And so it's inspired by Lean Startup. How many of you have heard of Lean Startup? Pretty good. It's a good chunk of folks. And then Agile development. I assume everyone's heard of Agile at this point, if you're not working in it. It's the practice of bringing the nature of a product to life faster, the true nature to life faster. Right? And the true nature of that product is the experience. How can we test that experience? And we do that through a collaborative, cross-functional way. We work with our engineers, with our product managers, with our marketers, with our designers. And we focus less on deliverables and more on building a shared understanding of that experience and versions of that experience as quickly as possible. And when you put those two things together, design thinking and lean UX, you end up with this. You start prioritizing learning over growth. The first thing you want to do is you want to learn. Will this work? Does this work? Does it make sense for my audience? Does it make sense for my business? Once you find the right ideas, then you can scale them out. That's when growth kicks in. But let's prioritize learning what the right idea is first before we scale it out. And so the simplest assumptions that you need to make and to bring your team around, it's really amazing. I do this all the time. We bring teams together who are so confident that they're all on the same page, that they're all building the same product, that they're all solving the same problem for the same target audience. And you bring them together and you have them articulate their assumptions to each other in a room, and it's like they're total strangers half the time. And these are the assumptions, right? These are basic UX assumptions. Who is our customer? Who do we think they're building products for? What pain points do they have related to the thing that we do? Right? Related to the thing that we do. how will our thing, our product, our service, our feature solve that pain point for them? Let's articulate those assumptions as a team together in the same room. What features are important? What do we think are important? What's our differentiation from the competition? What makes us better than the other people doing this? And then finally, how are we going to make money? Because that's important too. Declare these assumptions early with your entire team and make sure everybody's aligned. This is a critical step. Because then all of a sudden everyone's firing on the same, the same cylinders in the same direction. And when you take these assumptions and everybody articulates them in a room, you then turn them into hypotheses. Right? You just change the syntax of the language of requirements into this. We believe that building this feature, right? We don't know, we believe that building this feature, this service, this widget, this product, whatever it is, for these people, right? Who are we building for? Will achieve this outcome. And here's the critical piece. Your definition of success. We will know that we are successful when we see this signal from the marketplace. And this should be quantifiable. We should be able to measure it on a regular and ongoing basis. And as you launch features or test features, to see how those metrics move and know whether or not you're getting traction with your audience. This is the syntax of the hypothesis. And it just changes the conversation amongst your team from go build this to we think building this will work, but let's find out first before we dump all of our resources in one direction. So if we rephrase the plan cast hypothesis, this is my business partner, by the way. We change into a hypothesis. We believe that creating the ability for people to share events will provide them with better awareness and greater enjoyment of their social circle. And then we define some criteria that tell us whether this is successful or not. Now you can have a conversation about whether this is true or not. So let me show you a few case studies about how we put this into action with various teams and what we've learned from that. First, this is a case study from the Ladders where I was the director of user experience for 4 years. And there's a London Outpost that's a job board that used to be in the $100,000 space. Now, one day, the CEO came to the product development team, of which I was a part, and he declared that he had an epiphanous shower moment. You guys familiar with those? He's like, oh my God, I know what we're going to do today and for the next 6 months. Let's go do this. And what he decided to do was he said, we're going to provide, we're already a premium service. What we're going to provide is a personal representative in New York who is assigned to every paying customer. Every email, every phone call, every time that you contacted the Ladders, it would get routed to this individual who would provide you with one-on-one guidance and get to know you and hold your hand through your job search process. It's an interesting idea, and the point of this was to drive retention and acquisition. And we dumped a ton of time and money into this. Everything had to be reworked and rewritten and reprogrammed and redesigned. Phone systems. Just think about the phone systems alone, of knowing who's calling, who their rep is, and being able to route that directly to that rep. Every email system, every email that we actually wrote had to now include pictures of the rep and contact information of that rep and tying that into the databases. And what if that rep quit? Right? We spent 9 months building this system. 9 months rewriting the software, redesigning it, hardwiring equipment, and it failed. It didn't drive retention, it didn't change acquisition, and it cost us a ton of money. This idea was not, the idea was an interesting one, right? Maybe it'll work, but it was based on intuition. And it came down as a requirement. Provide each paying customer with a personal job search assistant available via email and phone. Now, if it had come down as a hypothesis, all of a sudden we can have a conversation about this. When your CEO comes down and he says, do this, you do it. When the CEO comes down and says, you know what, we believe that providing a personal assistant to each customer will drive customer satisfaction, renewals and retention rates, now we've got something to test. Let's have this conversation. It opens up the dynamic of that discussion to a conversation. And the questions that we asked in retrospect is, how could we have better defined our product? The first thing we could have done is articulate our assumptions. Who we're building for, why we're building it, and what we hope to achieve. We could have defined our hypotheses, and we could have run lightweight tests to validate whether or not this was the right thing to do. Maybe you just run an A/B test with the ability to sell the service and see if anybody clicks it. Maybe you build a button that does nothing but sign people up for a service that doesn't yet exist to see if there's interest. Maybe you route 1% of the population to a personal job search assistant and see if that actually increases their customer satisfaction. Right? Many, many ways to test this idea without dumping 9 months worth of work into it and focusing on the actual target, the outcomes that we were targeting. And so the question you need to ask yourself, the first question as you set out, you've declared your assumptions, okay, what problem are we trying to solve? And as you're figuring out how you will solve it, the real question is, how do you know it will work? How do you know? What's going to be your measure of success? You need to be able to measure success. And the way that this changes a team's approach to a project is this. The measure of progress changes. And it changes from outputs to outcomes. Right? Instead of build me this feature, it's achieve this business goal. Figure out on your own as a team how to get there. But I'm not requiring that you build a certain feature. I just need you to solve this business problem for me. Because you can launch features and they can still suck really badly. Right? I think there are people who live under that green block somewhere. Let me try to articulate this a little bit more. The thing that you want to do is when you give your team these outcomes to focus on, you want to focus on outcomes they can actually affect. If you work in a large organization, revenue is not something one team can directly affect. Multiple teams drive up and down. We call that impact. Right? Customer satisfaction, net promoter scores, lots of things feed into that. That's an impact. Focus your teams on outcomes they can actually affect. Let me illustrate this a bit more from the physical world. Okay? This is McDonald's feature. Okay? This is their output. This is the thing they put in the world. Right? This is the outcome of that feature. America, y'all. This is the impact. That's the difference, right? McDonald's has an outcome that they drive with the products that they sell. And they're not the only contributor to the obesity rates in America. That's an impact. There are other things that drive that, right? Lifestyles, Burger King, etc. Right? But my point is, focus your teams on those outputs. I'm sorry, on those outcomes specifically. Now, many companies currently manage to output. And they do that because it's easy. It's easy to manage the output. Did you build the new sign-in page? Yeah, I built it. Good job. You get your bonus, right? Did it change anything? Did it change the conversion rates? Well, I don't know. That's not what you tasked me with. You tasked me with building a sign-in page. Task your team with the outcome that you want them to achieve. Another case study. A team I worked with from the Ladders. A team I worked with from the Ladders was tasked with changing the response rate from job seekers to employers. Employers contact job seekers through our system, and job seekers were replying at a rate of about 14%, which is bizarre, right? You're paying money, you're looking for a job, employers are reaching out to you, and you're not getting back to them. We tasked the team with moving this rate. This was the outcome they were focused on. We didn't tell them what to build, how to build it, if it even had to be software. Just fix this problem. That was the team's job, and it was a 2-pizza team. Right? American pizzas. Pizzas nonetheless. This team was made up of designers, engineers, and product managers, QA as well, and they worked together on solving this problem. They brainstormed ideas, and they had cover from management to do whatever they wanted. So if they wanted to go to the call center which was across the street, and say, I want you to call every member that hasn't replied to an employer email in the last 30 days. That's something we could have done to see if it would have affected the rate, and it would have. That was not a scalable solution for us. So this team worked together, collaborated, had the freedom to experiment and the freedom to fail. And through that failure, we learned very quickly through fast iterations which hypotheses worked and which hypotheses didn't. Now their goal was 75%, they got to 68%. Was that a success? Did they fail? It's another challenge of managing the outcomes. It's not a binary yes or no, we succeeded, we launched the thing, or we didn't launch the thing. It's squishy. Right? So it's difficult to manage the outcomes. You have to have your software instrumented to measure these things. It's challenging, but it's worth it because your team starts to solve problems. As you're observing and as you're measuring, you want to make decisions based on objective observation, not just subjective intuition. You want to, you want to see what your customers are doing and why you're doing it. And when you've collected that data, the quantitative data and the qualitative data from speaking to your customers, you have you have a decision to make and you have 3 choices. If it's a bad idea, like this one. If the observation says that you're not meeting your goals, kill that idea before it kills you. Right? If from that objective observation, it's a bad idea, kill that idea. Okay. Sometimes you get feedback that shows that you're on the right track, but you're just not making the kind of progress you'd like to make. You're improving the metric, but it's just too slow. It's a step in the right direction, but you're not quite there. That's the infamous pivot. That's your choice at that point, right? An overused phrase, but the point is you're maintaining your strategy, but you're changing your tactics to drive that forward. When you find a good idea, one that's getting clear, measurable, positive, quantitative, and qualitative feedback from the market, that's when you double down. That's when you scale that idea and you blow it out. And the way you find those ideas, again, is not by spending months and months and months of delivery, but you run short experiments, short cycles. Here's another case study from a company that I worked with last year called Lendo. Lendo does micro-lending in the third world countries, and they do it through connecting all of your social networks and giving you a credit score where none exists in these countries, based on how much of your social network you connect. And then if you don't pay your loan back, they shame you to your public network, to your social network, which is a really big deal in village-based communities, right? Because that's a big shame, and it actually drags down the credit scores, again, that never existed before in these countries, of the people in your social network. So you only add people who you think are going to pay back their loans. So it's a self-perpetuating cycle of trustworthy friends. Now, what they were seeing was that users were not returning to their site, and they weren't adding members to their address books. Now, they had a ton of solutions. They could have moved forward with any one of those solutions, but they didn't know which one to move forward with. They don't have, they're a startup, they don't have a ton of money to burn, and they want to make sure that the solution will have the most amount of traction, with participants, with their clientele being in the Philippines and in Colombia, and their offices being in New York. And so we kept it really simple. We sketched out a series of ideas about how to do this, and we ran remote usability studies. I was in New York, the customers were in Colombia and the Philippines, and we showed them a series of ideas, and we got a series of an amount of qualitative feedback that helped us determine which idea had the most potential. Now, I know a lot of you already do this kind of work, but just doing it in advance of deciding which features to build gives you a bit more insight as to which direction to go in and where to spend less time, where to waste less time. The goal in all of this is to mitigate risk by not building things that people don't want, right? Why would you do that? Why would you build things that people don't want? Let me show you another example. I did some work last year with Sesame Street. This was a really cool project, and it's ongoing, and it's really fun. Now, what they were trying to do, and what they're still trying to do, is they're getting into the tablet market. Now, their audience are 3- and 4-year-olds, preschool kids getting ready to go into kindergarten. and they'd like to bring their material on a tablet to the preschool. This is a new market for them, huge investment. Tablet software, they want to sell the tablets to the school itself. It's high risk, and it's a long-term initiative. Now they could jump in with both feet and say, we're doing this, no matter what, we're moving forward. But the challenge is, will this even work? Now I have kids, they're a little older than 3 and 4 at this point, but if you have a 3 or 4-year-old, and now you have 30 of them, and one teacher, can't you even handle a tablet at the same time? We're not going to have 30 tablets in the classroom. Is this even a viable idea in the physical context of where it needs to be used? So this is what we did to test the idea. The first thing we did was in-class observation. We just went and sat in the classrooms. I don't know when the last time you've been to a 3-year-old classroom, right? You just watch the teacher work. When does she sit down? When does she use material? What do the kids do? What are the stations? What's the flow of the day? Just to get a sense of the physical context in which the product would be used before we did anything. The next thing that we did was we built a PDF content test. So we had Sesame Street has a ton of educational content. We built a 2-page PDF. We put it on an Android tablet, and we gave it to two different teachers in 2 different classrooms. And we said, here you go. This is some content. No real direction, no direction to use it in the classroom. Just read this content and try to incorporate it into your learnings, into your teachings. Now that essentially was free. We had the content, we arranged it in PDF, we gave it to teachers, we got feedback. Yes, I would use this. Oh, this was a good idea. I incorporated it in the afternoon. I didn't actually use the tablet in the classroom, but I liked the idea in here. Good feedback on the content itself, and good to see whether the teacher would actually take the tablet, which we gave her, and bring it into the classroom. The next thing we did was card sorting. Again, just to get a sense of how to organize the conversation, how to organize the material, and how to build the product itself. And the last thing that we did was a clickable prototype in Balsamiq. Export the PDF with links, hand it to a teacher, and let them click through it and get a sense of that feedback. Now, all of this was done without writing a line of code. Right? We didn't write a single line of code. To get an idea of what product to build, how to refine it, and this was a cross-functional effort. Product management, engineering, design, content, business. Working on this together, attending these sessions. This is what the product looked like. Itself, the prototype essentially looked like. Again, this level of light testing gives you the insight and helps you define a better product. Another company I worked with last year, which I can't tell you their name, they build a premium subscription product for a wealthy audience. Just leave it at that. Existing subscriber base, but their growth had flatlined. And so what they wanted to do was pivot to appeal to a broader audience. Now there was huge risk in this. Huge risks, right? Significant investment to redesign the entire product, to open it up to this different audience, right? Would this actually cannibalize their existing crowd? And there was actually no guarantee that this new audience was even interested. So again, how do we know we're on the right path? And again, lightweight wireframes, prototypes, taken down on a tablet to a user conference, get people to click through, and the feedback that you get there immediately helps you redefine the product moving forward. And just so you think that this doesn't apply, this can apply just to software, this applies to anything that you put together, including conferences. I put on an event early last year, called Agile UX NYC. And as some of you know, putting on an event is expensive and hugely time consuming. And I had no idea if anybody was going to come to our event. And so we ran a test. Right? Would anyone attend? Lots of upfront costs. And we ran a test. And that test was to launch a landing page. Agile UX NYC coming February-ish 2012, no speakers, no venue, just a rough date, rough content. Interested, sign up with your email address. And we launched that test. That cost us nothing, 2 hours of time. Tweeted it out over the weekend, 250 people signed up. All right? That's good feedback from the market, there's interest. The next thing that we did was we put up an Eventbrite page and started to sell tickets. We had slightly more details. We had a date, we had a venue, but no confirmed speakers. And people started buying tickets. Again, increased level of fidelity, increased market traction. Now they're spending real money. Now we have to put a conference on, right? But that was a good test for us, and the conference was a huge success. The last point I want to make is that these ideas, it says lean UX in it, right? And it says design thinking. But these are not just ideas for designers. These are ideas for cross-functional teams. We have to do this with our colleagues in engineering, in product management, in business, in QA, in whoever is a member of your organization needs to be a part of this, as long as we don't hopefully exceed that the 2 pizza barrier. When you build cross-functional teams, you start to bring those different perspectives to the product definition process. You start to bring feasibility into that process early on. You start to bring other creative ideas from non-design disciplines. We start to bring increased empathy for the user into this, because we're bringing the user into these early conversations. So all of a sudden, folks who perhaps were never exposed to the customer before now get to meet them on a regular basis and see the feedback of the products that they're building for them. Folks on the team understand why we're doing this and why we're making the decisions that we are, because they're seeing the feedback come from these experiments and these hypotheses. And the teams learn more and faster by sharing the discovery and creation process. So you're building that shared understanding. They don't have to wait to get that information from a researcher or a designer upstream before they can start doing their job. Everybody can move faster. One last case study, and then I'll finish up. Did a lot of work with PayPal last year. PayPal is a monolithic organization with 13,000 employees. They're a company of the internet age, but they've become a company of the financial services age. It's really an interesting organization to work in. And they have a heavily siloed environment where engineers, back-end engineers over here, front-end engineers over here, designers over here, everyone's in different places. They staff teams from, they'll pick an engineer in Austin, a designer in California, QA in India, a writer in Omaha. I mean, it's kind of nuts. And so we were working with them, and then how do you get an organization like that to start thinking about working in these leaner, faster, more iterative ways? And the way that we did that with them, and the way that they're moving forward, is they're building pilot teams. They're taking small teams of engineers, designers, and product managers. They're putting them in the same room, and it's a big room, in San Jose. They're staffing folks from the same locale, on the same teams, and they're having them work together, and they're going from sketch to prototype, and they're moving forward. And what's interesting is that this pilot team is learning 2 things. The first thing they're doing is they're learning how to practice these techniques together and how to build products in this faster way. The other thing they're doing is they're functioning like a minesweeper. They're bumping up against the limitations of the organization. They're bumping up against the IT staff that doesn't want to give them a staging environment. They're bumping up against the legal environment that doesn't want them testing anything on real customers. Right? They're bumping up against marketing who doesn't want them to trash the brand in the process. Right? So they're learning how to work as a team and inside the organization. And so when you define the right product, you reduce the time spent building the wrong product. It seems obvious, but why would you build the wrong product? You're reducing waste out of the process. You're building team-wide momentum and a shared understanding about why you're doing the things that you're doing. Everybody can buy into it. And you're ensuring that all your resources are spent on the right initiatives. And then by shifting the way we work, I want you to remember these points. Requirements are actually assumptions. Let's prove them before we double down on them. We want to focus on outcomes. What are the business problems we're trying to solve, and how will we measure success? Work together as a cross-functional team to come up with these ideas, and then test those ideas ruthlessly to figure out which ones are the right ones, which ones are wrong, and which ones you should double down on. Thanks a lot. I appreciate your attention this morning.